Hey, it's Greg. This is the Square Pizza Pod, cooked up by Shermco. Okay, Mr. Mo Green, welcome back to the Square Pizza Pod.
Good to be back. Thanks.
For our listening audience, I know everybody listened to the first time you're on the podcast back in June of 2020. I think at that point in time, you were leading Z. Smith Reynolds, the wonderful foundation. You were kind enough to share about the roast at one of your most recent birthday parties, which I still think was a highlight of the episode. And we'll get to kind of what you're doing now. But first of all, how have you been since June 2020?
We've been blessed.
Yeah.
Family's doing well. I'm doing well. Yeah, completely blessed.
Well, that's great. Good to see you're good. The family's good, and you've been busy. So health and rest are quite important. So you obviously, what we're here today to talk about kind of your current venture and kind of pursuit of leading and being the NC Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so really honored to have you here today, Mr. Green. Really excited to continue to learn from you and hear more about your vision. Couldn't be a more important race in our state's kind of history and future. And really grateful for you to take time today. So yeah, if you don't mind, we'd love to just start maybe with a basic question, but why run for NC Superintendent of Public Instruction?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. And so I would share with you that I entered the race because I had a deep concern about the direction of public schools in North Carolina. You can look at any number of things, including funding as an example. Believe that North Carolina is woefully underfunding our public schools. Compared to the rest of the nation, a report that came out that places us at 48th, places us as we're actually at the absolute bottom with regards to effort that our state puts into funding compared to other states. That report was updated to now put us at 49th. Yeah, that translates to things like teacher pay, where last year, I believe, beginning teacher pay, we were 46th in the entire country. I think about things like then at the same time, we have a taxpayer-funded private school voucher program that is being expanded enormously. And the impact that that's going to have on our public schools, where billions upon billions of dollars over the next decade that could go into our public schools will not be going into our public schools. And so I think about then things like how educators are being treated. It is remarkable to me how the language, the tone, and the tenor is at a level of disrespect among many folks with regards to how they view our educators. And so those things certainly were things that caused me to deeply consider entering the race. I actually got a call from the governor's office, Governor Cooper, and ultimately had a conversation with him that led me to making the decision to actually get in the race. And so now, having sort of cleared that hurdle, then it was a question for me about, well, if I'm going to get in it, what is this going to be about? And it can't just be about raising up the concerns. I believe we've got to have a vision going forward. And so I do have a vision that I believe where our public schools can go in North Carolina. It's a vision we utilized in Guilford County Schools when I was superintendent there. And that is to use a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., intelligence plus character, that being the goal of true education, and combining it with a focus on excellence. And so we do the same thing at the state level, is to use those that same quote, if you will, the same thought, and then that same focus on excellence being where we're going to strive to go for our public schools in North Carolina.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think hopefully anybody paying attention to public schools in North Carolina would agree with most, if not everything you said around the need to improve, the need to support teachers, and to increase funding to make sure we have means to do so, right, in the great state of North Carolina. I guess going to the funding piece, Mr. Green, if and when perhaps you are elected, how does that actually work with increasing funding, either locally or at the statewide? Maybe for those that aren't as familiar with the political structure here, how might that work in an ideal situation?
Great. So I'll put it in the context of how it works in relationship to this position.
Yep, please.
that I'm running for. And so the state superintendent of public instruction, I believe, has two major roles, one of which is to be the chief administrative officer for the state, oversee our public schools and license educators and administer currently about $11 billion annually. The second thing that this position does is be, I say, the chief advocacy officer for the state. So lifting up and providing information related to public schools that can be shared with the General Assembly, with the governor, with other stakeholders, and advocating for needed changes. And so it's in that context that I would say that the issues around funding would fall in the category of first trying to advocate for more funding for our public schools. The General Assembly will ultimately, at the state level, makes those appropriations. This position also then can, seek funding from other sources, like federal funding, as an example. This position also then, works with local districts as they try to, work with their, commissions, county commissions to have funds as well. If you think about, I'm going to use round numbers for a moment, but I'm going to say,
major, so that helps me. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to say 60% or so of the dollars that are used in public schools are coming from our state of North Carolina. I'm going to say somewhere around 30%. It's going to obviously vary by the locality of the dollars are coming from local dollars, 10% or so federal dollars, and obviously there could be some other sources in there that would move those numbers around a bit as well. So that's what I would say with regards to funding and how this position works with that. I guess the last thing I'll just lift up is this position also, I think, is charged within as the chief administrative officer as to, trying to take the resources that it has available to it, to use those most effectively to help, local districts, charter schools, figure out how they can use those dollars most effectively as well.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I heard you say a few things, 60% coming from the state, right? So pretty important. Also heard you say we, or anybody within that position, can do more, right? And so positioned to do more to make sure those funds, one, are increased, and two, going to be used and utilized in the right way. And I think it connects well, Mr. Green, to one of your main kind of pillars on the website around revering teachers and supporting educators. I'm biased because I'm a former teacher. We have and work with a lot of teachers. I know education runs in your blood, but in terms of just revering educators and obviously increasing maybe perhaps money and funds, what does that specifically look like as you're campaigning for this position?
Yeah, so it starts first with a mindset, because I think then other things I think should naturally flow from that if you've got the right mindset to begin with. And so when I talk about revering educators, both words are important. Educators certainly include teachers, but it's more than just our teachers. It's everyone who has a part to play in the education of our students. And so I think about, cafeteria workers, custodians, bus drivers. So broad enough thought about what educators, who they include. And then the word revere, I wanted to find a word that is, a lot of folks talk about we ought to respect our teachers and educators, and certainly agree with that. But I was trying to find a word that would put it at even a higher level, particularly in these times where there's such disrespect of educators going on. And so that's the word I've come up with. This trying to be sure that folks understand that this is a noble profession. It is the profession that will basically define what tomorrow looks like for students, for our community, and for our state. And so we need to fully respect and revere our educators. And then what then sort of flows from that, certainly I think then would be, paying our educators substantially more. And when I talk about that, I start first with base pay. and increasing our base compensation for educators. And then we can think about incentives and other things on top of that. We can certainly think about what I would call compensation-related benefits, things like stipends for housing, as an example. And then I also want us to think about working conditions. I think, increasingly put more and more on our educators. Larger class sizes, more duties for teachers, that take away from their ability to actually work with students as they need to. And I think we really would want them to. And so we've got to sort of address the multiple and the multitude of tasks we place on our educators. And then certainly, got to be sure that the facilities, the environments, those things are appropriate, and that we've got strong and effective leaders leading particularly our schools. So those are things I would lift up when I talk about revering educators as well.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. I think, again, a good segue maybe to the educators at home, right? And maybe a little bit of a biased question, because so much of SHRMCO's work is focused on family empowerment across the state. And so, again, selfishly and biasedly love seeing your focus and emphasis on parent engagement. We got a guest question here from Gia on our team, who leads our work. But yeah, really curious about what you see as best practices for family engagement in terms of defining, measuring it, supporting families as you seek this position, as we think about like more holistic family engagement across the entire state of North Carolina.
Great. Certainly I think that there are many schools and school districts that are doing good work with regards to parental engagement and community engagement. And so what I would want to do is, lift those places of great work up and be sure that they're expanded. But the things that I then think about as great work include our school leaders, district leaders actually doing a lot of listening to our parents. Parents know a lot about what's going on with their children. And then certainly communicating, how we can be in great partnership with parents in the education of their children. One of the things that I think is so vital is that we have got to be sure that we step outside of the school buildings to have these kinds of conversations. It's often the case that folks say, well, you got to come to the schoolhouse. And many parents, guardians find that to be an intimidating place to be. And so, we've got to be sure that while we certainly want to have folks in our buildings and encourage that, I think it's important to also go where they are. I'll lift up one thing we did in Guilford County Schools. We created what's called a Guilford Parent Academy, which was this, enormous opportunity to engage with parents in multiple and varied ways. We went to where parents were working to talk about things like literacy, as an example. We put a lot of resources online so that parents could access them at different times of the day. We certainly did things in our schools, but we also did things in community centers and other places as well. And think about thing and timing, not only sort of when it's convenient for us, but when it's convenient for parents. So thinking about second and third shifts and having those conversations there as well. And so that would be an example of things that I would try to encourage us to think about on a state level as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Almost hearing you say a customer service approach to taking care of families, going to them and making sure we're supporting them. And by doing that, right, supporting their learners and the future of education in our state. So I appreciate that approach and that mindset. I know you've had many successful kind of careers in different parts of your career, many in education. But in terms of surprises, as you've run and pursue this position, have you had any surprises, Mr. Green, along the way?
Yeah, so I've certainly had a lot of pleasant surprises and things.
You can share a few good ones. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
I have met wonderful folks. Yeah, I got to, met with a person and got to feed a donkey.
Wow.
Yeah, I've had all kind of sort of neat things happen on the campaign trail. I've also had things that I would say, I guess, would fall in the category of disturbing and disappointing. The primary thing would be, as I got through the primary and learned who my opponent would be, and to learn about my opponent's rhetoric and what she has done, and thinking about how that would impact our children. That has been disheartening, to say it as politely as I can. And so those would be things that I would lift up as certainly pleasant things, but also things that have been disheartening. And maybe just because maybe not everyone sort of knows. And so I don't want to leave anyone with sort of this vague understanding of what I'm lifting up when I talk about my opponent's rhetoric and background.
Sure.
When I think about perhaps in three areas, experience, belief in public schools, and character, first, with regards to experience, someone who homeschools her children, and I have nothing against homeschooling, but this is a position that oversees, as we discussed earlier, $11 billion annually, administers $11 billion annually, oversees 2,500 plus schools. This is a major operation. And so I worry about that. Secondly, I worry about, belief in public schools, where I fully believe in our public schools, and, have dedicated a significant part of my life to public schools, including having been superintendent of Guilford County Schools and deputy superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, the attorney for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, put our children in our public schools, wrote a love letter to our folks, a love letter to public school educators when our youngest graduated 6 years ago. So I didn't do it for this campaign. And at the same time, then I've got an opponent who calls our public schools socialist machines and indoctrination centers, and then telling parents not to send their children to public schools. And then finally, character, where I'm trying to lift up this sense of character and making it equally as important as academic outcomes, what we did in Guilford County Schools, and having it being recognized as a national district of character because of that work. And we'll try to take that across the state, versus someone who took her own children to the attempted insurrection on January 6th, who has called for the executions of folks like President Biden and Governor Cooper, and has called for the execution on pay-per-view, public execution of Barack Obama. It's the kind of rhetoric and believe me, I'm only touching the surface in what I've just shared with you and your listeners, but it's the kind of thing that as I've gone out on the campaign trail and listened to folks raise their concerns about my opponent, and the concerns I personally have about this person being next to our children, that's been a challenge for me, quite honestly.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, providing that clarity, but also the leadership you're exuding and continuing to do what's right and to continue to support the good work of so many educators and future educators in North Carolina. Mr. Green, I know you're busy, but let's get you out of here hopefully on a few fun and rapid fire questions. I know you're an avid listener of the Square Pizza Pod and listen to it every day, but when you're done listening to the Square Pizza Pod and you're traveling and campaigning, what musical artist are you listening to?
So it's a variety of folks, but I would put at the top of the list, folks who know me well know I've got to lift up Luther Vandross,
Okay.
and Adele, would be
Okay.
another one that I would lift up as two that would be at the top of the list. But I like to listen to a lot of different artists.
I
And
should note
believe
this.
me, I have given, the campaign trail has you on the road quite a bit. So I've
I
had a
bet,
chance
yeah.
to listen to a lot of music.
And I should know this, so forgive me if it's a bad question, but is there an official song for the campaign or the campaign trail?
I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that we have an official song for the
Okay.
campaign.
Okay, fair. One more thing to add to the list. Mr. Green, for the listening audience, what's one actionable, I might know this answer, but I'm going to give it to you, or at least give you the question. What's one actionable thing our listening audience can do to either support you or support the future of public education in North Carolina?
Well, I would say if we're going to go with one, it's got to be vote for Mo Green as the next superintendent of public instruction.
I appreciate that. Mr. Green, any final thoughts you want to leave our listening audience as you continue to campaign and fight for what's right for NC Public Schools?
Yeah. So if I could expand on that last question and suggest maybe 2 or 3 other things that folks can do to support the campaign, you can certainly go to my website, which is mogreen4nc.com, and you can sign up to volunteer. You can also donate through that campaign website. And then what I've shared with folks all across this state is I do believe that the very soul of public education is on the ballot this November, and that it is going to take champions of public education to meet this moment. And so I would certainly share with folks that I need folks to be champions of public education. And if so, then the first thing that I mentioned when you said what's the one thing, then when it comes to November and election day or early voting, as the case may be, to actually vote for me.
Yeah, certainly appreciate all you've done. Appreciate your leadership up until June 2020 when we first got to connect and have you on the pod. But really appreciate all you're doing to continue to lift up what's right in North Carolina and the future of public schools in North Carolina. So thank you again for joining, and thank you for all you're doing, and best of luck over the coming months, Mr. Green.
Hey, no, very much appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have a conversation with you today, and you be blessed.
You as well. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much for checking out the Square Pizza Pod, making a few selfish requests. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps spread the word about the podcast, and share this with a friend. We appreciate it. Thanks.